interacted with him a few times, but I preferred to give him his space. And so I was not an AWOist. I'm still not an AWOist. Admired him from a distance. I moved in and out of his politics, of his political activities, at my own choice, at my own convenience. Always viewing, especially at that time, politicians with great suspicion, no matter how much I admired them. And so, during crisis, I sought him out, and of course he always received me. And we would have, very frank discussion. I remember when he came out of prison, we had an interesting conversation in his office, and that was the very day when I went to talk to him about the question mark on his accepting a position. And I looked at his desk. I said to him, so this, even you don't know the history of this desk. And then I narrated to him how we slept under it. It was a very huge desk with lots of space there. When we were protecting the clandestine, well, not clandestine really, but the Biafran radio, the eastern region at that time, the radio Enugu, which was brought from the east to record and transmit the correct results of a certain election. And so we took positions the police were looking for it everywhere, but they didn't know it was at the place they last suspected, right inside Awolowo's house. And so we rotated protecting the place anyway. And there were a couple of nights when I actually slept under that desk. And so I mentioned that to him.
When we organized parties, he used to want to be part of the organization. He would scrutinize the program for the party, and he used to be around. There were pictures of him sitting with us at our parties. I hope those pictures survive. They must be in the library in Kenya. And he would sit there and listen to us make our speeches. Somebody would be chairman, somebody would be MC, and the celebrants would also speak. So perhaps our early tutoring in public speaking was from that time. And we would entertain at Christmas. He used to organize together with other parents in the neighborhood for Father Christmas to visit each home with gifts for the children. So he was really a hands-on father, despite his busy schedule. And he had pet names for his children. Mine was Toti Bonton or Latox. That was his favorite one.
Organization that was founded in 1951 in AWO by 8 prominent people who are colleagues of Chief Awolowo and who met for almost a year before they could inaugurate that party. Almost in a year, what were they doing? You examine all the problems of Nigeria. How do we solve it? And their decision came out to be known as the Action Group Manifesto.
Its objectives were to bring the benefits of a modern civilized society to the people of the Western region at that time. To start with, to the extent that it was possible, if you like, at the end of end of the 40s, early 50s, basic things like free education, free health for those who were below 18, and then later minimum wage for workers, and then promotion of sports, or the first modern sports stadium, and later the first television station, and so on. So if you want to summarize it, the action group was introducing into that region a modern civilized culture in place of basically rural and colonial and African setting that they met.
Shawlo knew at that time that the resources of the whole Western region would not be able to meet the expenses of the free education. So he started what is called the capitation tax of 10 shillings and 6 pence for every male and female adult in the whole Western region. Propagating the philosophy that if you pay this fee, whether you have 10 children or 20 children or something, all of them go free.
When Awolowo was running the Western region, we were far advanced beyond South Africa. We were the most advanced country in Africa. And not only in Africa, we were more advanced than many of the countries of Southeast Asia today, who are now ahead of us. We were the first to have television in Africa. In fact, we beat South Africa, we beat a lot of European countries to having television. And our people were making progress. The free education program was creating manpower in the West that we had. If with our television, we didn't have to depend on expatriates to run it for us. By the time they were trying to install the television, they already had enough foresight to train people, so that we had indigenous manpower to run it, and we ran it very successfully. So Awolowo had the vision to train manpower. That is one of the benefits of the free education program. He saw that we will need manpower to keep sustaining the progress that we were making. So he emphasized on education, on training of manpower, and the program was a sustainable one. It was a sustainable progress we were making in the West, which was leaving the other parts of the nation behind.
Independence was a negotiated independence, and there were basically three major parties in the country. We had the Action Group, we had the NCNC, led by Dr. Azikiwe, then we had the NPC, led by the Saddam of Sadako. Those were the three major parties, and they negotiated amongst themselves, and also negotiated with the British colonial government, so that the reason being that if they didn't reach an agreement among themselves, the British would exploit that and retard the pace towards independence. So that was his role, agreeing with the other parties on basic fundamental issues.
Oh, there's no question that he was one of the foremost nationalists who brought independence about. With his colleagues like Nnamdi Azikiwe, Abatnankole, of course, blazed the trail much earlier, and Mbolu Ojike is one of the pioneers. He, of course, had the clearest idea, in my view, of the direction in which the nation should go. In other words, He was a planner and he was a visionary. And so I mention this only to emphasize the fact that long before independence, a certain strong cleavage had begun between certain elements who were considered conservative, and these were mostly regarded as being in the former feudal north, and the radicals, shall we say, the progressives, were considered the south. But of course the British had inserted what I consider the seeds of self-destruct even before they left. They falsified not just the first elections, they falsified even the census, its most egregious form of legacy to leave behind. And so there was always a dispute. Incidentally, I'm not just saying this, this fact's been coming out in the memoirs of the former colonial officers like Harold Smith, who were ordered to falsify the figures and so on. So the independence was obtained on a very false basis.
What we had at that time, surprisingly, was a very strong opposition. You know, the actual group did not win the 1959 federal election. It was won by the MPC, who then formed a coalition with the NCNC. And so the action group went into opposition. And the ruling coalition was a bit shocked at the type of very well-organized opposition that emerged, with the shadow ministers having thoroughly studied their subjects, were almost more knowledgeable than the ministers imposed in the coalition. And so it was a very highly principled, highly knowledgeable, highly enlightened opposition that we had. And so the ruling parties got scared. Really, they got scared, they were uncomfortable, they were not happy with this type of opposition. And culturally, Africa wasn't used to it. So they hatched a plan of getting rid of the opposition by dismembering the action group, which was the party spearheading the opposition. And the way, what they did was to get some collaboration from some sympathetic members of the action group in order to break it. And so they got the cooperation of Chief Obafemi, who had some grudges, so to speak, against Chief Awolowo. He believed that having left the region as premier, he should have, stayed put in Lagos and not interfere in the affairs of the West, since he, Akintola, was now in charge. But what he did not understand was that a party that was run on principles, policies, and various programs could not fold his arms about how those programs were being implemented in a place where it was ruling. So there was that resentment, and the MPC now took advantage of that, exploited it, got Akintola to their side. And then the whole plan of getting rid of Chief Awolowo and his group was put into place. So that's how he ended up in prison. The whole thing was a very simple scheme. The majority passed a resolution in the National Assembly declaring a state of emergency in the West, simply because there was a fight inside the House of Assembly. And they took over, appointed an administrator, and by the time the administrator's term was over, they had organized in such a way that they put Akintola back, in spite of the fact that he was a minority. And with that, not being satisfied with that, even with Awolowo, then it wasn't detention. They were all sent away to various places. I've forgotten the term that was used now. The term wasn't detention, but restriction. They were restricted to various parts of the state. Awolowo was restricted to Lekki at one time, where there was no no tap water, no electricity, and so on. So they were all restricted. And while this was going on, the federal government cooked up the treasonable felony plan, and straight from restriction, arrest and detention and trial followed. So it was all organized.
All the travails that he went through were designed to crush his spirit, to break him. There was no doubt about that. It was all designed to break his spirit. But he was never broken. He remained unbroken, unbowed and unbroken.
What there is no doubt about in my mind is that Awolowo was not involved in any real militancy. I'm sure, considering the violence that was unleashed on the opposition when they went to campaign in certain parts of the country, the north most especially, that he could have agreed to the kind of cadre training, in a radical country like Ghana then was. That's possible. But I honestly do not believe he was ever involved in any plot to overthrow the government. But that is what he was accused of. Treasonable felony was a technical expression. There was a resolve to get rid of him and his fellow progressives, backed by the British, incidentally, which were not comfortable about the more radical, politically radical South. So I consider his own instance a miscarriage of justice. And that might have applied across the board. I don't know.
Were devastated. I mean, see the level of grief in the whole of the West, in Lagos, everywhere. It was as if the world had come to an end. And we imagined that in prison too, that his spirit would be broken, and that would be the end of everything.
We weren't there when the news was broken to him, but he wrote it in his book. One of his books, either My March Through Prison or The Travails of Democracy. And he was told that, first of all, that he'd had an accident and that the doctors were battling to save his life. And he told us that, first of all, he prayed that he would survive. But afterwards, he found out that he had passed away, and he was distressed naturally. And his colleagues, who were also remanded in custody with him, were crying. They were devastated. The person who came to tell him was devastated. They all got devastated. But it was the day that he had to prepare the submission, or I don't know what the lawyers call it, for the defense of Chief Awolowo. So he had to make up his mind that his son had gone, there was nothing more he could do for him, and this is somebody who was fighting for his freedom.
He had this stoic spirit. His body was almost irrelevant to him. He was a man who lived by spirit. His spirit was preeminent. And his colleagues who were in prison with him were rolling and were on the floor and crying and wailing, and he was the one comforting them, telling them, it has happened, let us gear ourselves and prepare for the future. We have to go on with life. There are other things. So, and then, of course, he prepared his own defense, and anyone seeing that defense really knew that he had overcome his grief, and his mind had mastered his body thoroughly. And what he produced as a defense was was the work of a genius, almost, I would say.
There was no longer peace in Nigeria. There was no way they could handle the situation. They needed Awolowo. They needed Awolowo's wisdom. They needed his foresight. They needed his intellectual capabilities. So they had to release him. And because they released Awolowo, Awolowo's release stabilized the one's government, made it acceptable.
Question of seceding at that time would not have been possible. It would have been overrun by the northern military that was preponderant in the west. So, as far as I can assess what happened, I would say Ojukwo's declaration of Biafra as a separate state was premature from the point of view of Awolowo. Enough had not been done, and certainly the West was not sufficiently strong to withstand an occupation of northern troops.
Awolowo did not want war to take place. I know this personally from him. He did not want conflict to engulf the land of the West. And for me, this is a very pragmatic and very reasonable attitude to take, because the West was not militarily prepared. It was not represented really in the army. The army, and look at all the memoirs of many of the both combatants and the regular soldiers. The southern population, shall we say, of the army was treated like a second-class citizen. There's no question at all about it. And the Yoruba, definitely the West was very poorly represented there. I use the expression, and others did at the time, that we were really an occupied territory, under an army of occupation. And for those pragmatic reasons, Awolowo did not want war to take place here. And he made strenuous effort to prevent the secession. The records are coming out every day. And I can bear witness to it as narrated in my Ibadan Onkelema's years. I did meet Awolowo and asked him, are you sure you want to? You've been invited to take part in the government of General Gowon. You realize that if you take part, this will endorse the militarist attitude of the government. And he gave me this explanation that he did not want this to be a battleground for the simple reason that the West was not militarily prepared. There was no match at all. And he told me discussions we did had with Ojukwu, and much of this has been corroborated by many others who were present at that meeting. So I consider his position as that of somebody who, because of a situation of force majeure, political force majeure, realized that he had to go to play the role then of not quite the father figure, but the cohesive force for the Nigerian nation. And he did everything that he could to be that cohesive force, including accepting his position under the military regime of Gowon.
Of course, Gowon wooed him, invited him to come to the Federal Executive Council, not only as Minister of Finance, but also as Deputy Head of State and Deputy Head of Government. I mean, that's the greatest that any civilian has ever achieved in any military system, government, regime.
A naval blockade is normal. It's a normal instrument of war to prevent your enemy from getting reinforcements from outside. Nigeria was shipping food to the people of Biafra so that the people of Biafra will not suffer, as Awolowo explained. But Awolowo found that all the food that was being shipped to the people of Biafra were being hijacked by the Biafran soldiers. So instead of going to feed the ordinary people of Biafra, they were being used to feed the soldiers. So the soldiers and the leaders of the rebellion were feeding fat, getting enough strength to fight us, whereas the ordinary people of Biafra were suffering. So when you talk of Biafran suffering and being stabbed, it was not Awolowo that stabbed the Biafran. It was the Biafran leaders that stabbed the Biafrans because they hijacked the food made for the people, the ordinary people of Biafra. So when Awolowo found that this food was being hijacked, of course they stopped shipping the food. Because you cannot be shipping food to your enemies to be feeding themselves so they can be killing your own people. So all this Awolowo himself explained in details while he was still alive, when all those charges were being leveled against him. The question of restricting, of the change of currency, of course, when all Nigerian money in the central bank in Benin, in Port Harcourt, was already in Biafran hands. So they had a lot of money with which to buy weapons to use against us. Unless we change the currency, they will have used all that money to buy weapons, which they will have used to be killing our own soldiers. So it only makes sense to change the currency. And as Awolowo said, it was kept so secret and so confidential. Only he and perhaps one or two others knew about it. But if they had known about it, the whole thing would have been subverted. And it was a clever policy. It's a policy for which it should be given a Nobel Prize in economics, not a policy for which it should be abused by people. Because without that policy, we would not have won the war. It was one of the basic policies that made us to win the war.
As a politician, he was a pragmatist, and he was a leader. He was a political leader. He was very conscious of his role, very conscious of his role in history. His place would be in history. So I wouldn't say that he felt compelled to do it. He could have chosen not to. He refused to be a member of the Constitutional Committee, Constitutional Assembly, if you remember. And so he wasn't bothered about that. But he just felt that the time, and again, it's a matter of opinion, of judgment. Just felt that it was the correct thing for him to do at that particular time.
So his ambition was to lift this country from its third world status to a much higher status. That was his whole ambition in life. And there's no way he would not have contested in 1979 or 1983. He was consumed by that passion.
So the election of 1979 was won handsomely by Chief Awolowo. If it was a matter of votes, counting votes, he won it. But when they saw he was winning, they began to change figures in the north. But you remember in 1979, he had won the whole of all this southwest, Bendel, everything was won. He had won Kaduna, he had won in the Gongola, and all the northeast. Then all of a sudden, they began to change the figures. And in the twinkle of an eye, they said Awolowo lost. Awolowo did not lose. It is that Tunde decided Awolowo would not rule Nigeria. The same thing in 1983. He won.
They are not of the same capacity, level of excellence and competence. You can't compare the two. It was Shagari, you could have said, why did he contest as president? He wasn't keen. He had no ambition. He didn't think he had the capacity to rule this country. All he wanted to do was to win a seat in the Senate for Sokoto and have a relaxing time in the National Assembly. But the North said, no, we want you to be president. He was pushed into that position because they didn't want people like Kaka. You could see that for the 3.5 years he was there, he was a reluctant head of state. I mean, he just allowed things to be done by everybody else, and he was swept on by that tide of activities by others without any initiative coming from him.
I was looking out for any sign that there was anything wrong. There was no sign at all. Until we got to the house still looked normal. Everybody was going about their business. The gardeners were cutting the grass and all the rest of it. So I went into the house. I saw the steward. Shedrack, where's Papa? He said he's upstairs. And where's Mama? She's upstairs too. So I went up the stairs. I went straight to Papa's room, knocked the door. There was no answer. Then I knocked Mama's door, and one of the ladies that used to live with her at that time opened the door, and of course I saw her eyes, I saw sorrow in her face. And so nobody needed to tell me that so and so happened. I think I just worked it out. And, it was devastating. So nobody can tell the story of his end. He was Papa, typical Papa, mysterious to the end.
Yes, Ojukwu used that expression without acknowledging that he was borrowing it from somebody else. I forget which statesman described another leader as the greatest president that nation ever had. But I just point that out because everybody keeps saying Ojukwu said this, Ojukwu said that, as if he invented the expression. No, he did not. He didn't acknowledge it. But now to take it as, I would agree 100% with Ojukwu. Awolowo was the greatest president that Nigeria never had. He was a visionary, he was a pragmatist, he was a brilliant economist who actually succeeded in guiding financially the country through war without borrowing money from outside. He was meticulous. He was a meticulous individual. So whether you're talking about culturally, and he was very cultured. He believed very much in the cultures, in the arts. He was also, his openness to religious choices was unquestioned. He was a Christian, a very devout Christian, and yet he started the Pilgrims Board for Muslims. In fact, for me, that was a great error, because I think governments should never involve themselves in any kind of religious undertaking, organization, no matter what religion. The two should be kept separate. Otherwise, they become more demand, more demand. Any religion can get up anytime and say, you did this for that religion, therefore you must do it for this religion. So I disagree with him very fervently about that. But the important thing is the state of mind. That this is somebody who felt that religious pluralism and tolerance and acceptance was important for a nation. And he put his money where his mouth was. He actually started this pilgrim assistance for a religion that was not his. So whichever level you want to look at it. And again, all you have to do is compare him to the sequence of leaders this country has ever had. And I'm sorry, but mostly they are pygmies beside the giant statue.
And I believe that he was an extraordinary person. He was a man of destiny, and he recognized that he was in tune with his maker, the Holy Spirit, if you like, and he knew exactly what his mission was in life. And he had enough obedience to stay with that mission, no matter what. And he fulfilled the mission. He knew exactly what he was here to do, and he did it faithfully. And I think the reward is what we are seeing now, 25 years after he left us. the fascination, the interest is even more now than ever before in what he did.
Because I was a beneficiary of his free education system. I had a scholarship to go to the university, and when the course which I wanted was not available, I was sent to Leeds. I wanted to do English honors, and they only had the general degree. So, but for his the free education system, I wouldn't have done a particular degree, and heaven knows what I might be or not be today. So in that sense, yes, very critically affected me. But in terms of the politics, even if I wasn't suspicious of Awolowo himself, even if I had absolutely no mistrust of him, there were those around him whom I didn't want to, whom I looked at askance, and I didn't want to come too close to them. So it was better, I felt at the time, to remain an activist, strongly politically motivated outside, and moving in and out as occasion demanded.